today. We had a 5-hour hearing yesterday, and at that hearing we asked some really, I think there were some real very good questions asked, and we had representatives from the reference group speak, and I think Jackie Pearce is here tonight, the chair in particular, so thank you to you for coming along tonight. And I think if we've got a councillor in the room here tonight, Ron Nelson, is Ron here? Thank you for coming along tonight. Good to see you here. So look, I have the great pleasure of working with Bill regularly. Bill, as you all know, is a passionate advocate for the NDIS. Bill Shorten is our Shadow Minister for the NDIS and Government Services, and really has been one of the people, the fathers of the and the parent of the NDIS, along with Julia Gillard. This was a vision to give people empowerment, control over their own life when it comes to disability. Disability affects 1 in 5 of us. It is something that touches all of our lives, and we need to ensure that everyone with a disability is able to live the best life possible, and that we support the people around them as well. So that's the carers, the families. You are equally as important because you are there to help that person be their best. So I would like to thank you for coming, and I would like to thank Bill, because Bill has been here by my side, and we've worked together to try and do things better and differently with the NDIS. So please welcome Bill, and I'll hand over to you.
Hi everyone, and good evening. Can you hear me up the back? Great. They can hear me. I won't use the mic, but yeah, I think so.
Bill, can I just say one thing? I do apologise. One thing I should just say to everyone is that this is going to be live streamed tonight. So after Bill speaks, we will hand it over to questions. And I just wanted to say that because of privacy, we don't want people, unless you wish, to be identified. So if you can ask a question, and there'll be a roving mic, and then I'll repeat that. And we also do have a couple of journos in the room. So James is here, and I think we have Georgia from the, not Georgia, we've got Chad here, also a journo from the Addy here in the room. So if you don't wish to have your, just let people, the journalists know that you don't want to be, you have your questions or your words recorded. So I do apologise, Bill, I thought it was important to mention that.
Very important, thanks.
Yeah.
Good evening everybody. I'll try and keep my introduction brief. I'm really here to hear your experiences, your points of view on the NDIS. The NDIS is not even 10 years old. When I first went and got elected to Parliament about 12 years ago, I was put in as the Junior Government Minister for Disabilities. And my background has been, I've been a union rep, so I thought I'd seen unfairness. I used to spend a lot of time down here from Alcoa to Shell to BHP to the cement works, to Caniers, a lot of places along here. The DSE, the state forest people, you name it. And periodically in that job you'd see unfair treatment. But nothing I'd seen had prepared me for what I discovered when I got the area of disabilities. And what I mean by that is that what I hadn't realised is that when you have a significant disability, a profound and severe impairment, that's a fact of life. You can get it at birth. The precious child doesn't hit the developmental milestones that you're expecting, and you realise perhaps some time for treatment and support. You could get it in the blink of an eye on a country road. Kangaroo bounces by, you're fatigued, all of a sudden, calamity. You can get it through the onset of disease. So it can happen to anyone. What I hadn't realised is that the life of disability is a life of firefighting and crisis. child to get proper support, what do you do? Where do you go? If you're looking for housing, you had to be in complete crisis, then you could get housing. If you want intervention, your child practically had to give up your child. So that was the world in 2008. And I and others then thought, well, can't we do this better? And what I diagnosed, and this is my amateur diagnosis, the problem with impairment isn't the impairment. That's the fact of life I've just described. It's the barriers that get put in place to stop you living your life. The barriers that get put in place want you to be defined so that you're not defined just by your impairment, but the whole person gets seen. So my diagnosis was it's a lack of money and a lack of power. Disability is invisible. Some of you might have parents of children with significant autism. And if they're acting out in the supermarket, it will be the other unthinking adult who says to you, you're a bad parent. Well, why did you have that second child? The ignorance. That's a barrier. Then it can be that support for resources. So what we determined, and of course, when you're a carer, you're pretty tired. It's a full-time job. Well, when you're a participant, getting support, that's the focus, and you don't have time to do politics. So it's a lack of voice, a lack of agency, lack of control, lack of choice. So we created the NDIS, and this was a new world-first idea. The idea that you could get an individualised package where your goals are talked about. See, I've got this view that individuals and families, they're going to be more economical with scarce taxpayer dollars than if the money's administered through a large bureaucracy, or indeed even a large charity, as worthy as they are. So if you give individualised packages of support which are generous, appropriately so generous, I use the word generous, not threadbare, generous, the family and the participant will make it stretch. And thus the NDIS was born. Unfortunately, we lost an election, and that's the nature of these things. And so, coming back into disability after the last election, I realised that whilst I'm inestimably proud of the fact we have an NDIS, it didn't exist. It's not working the way I think it was meant to work. There's too much micromanagement of people's packages. There's the constant onslaught that somehow this is an unaffordable, unsustainable scheme, and the drumbeats of unsustainability emerging from their latest minister saying, oh, people are getting too much, it's not sustainable. As if there's too many people with severe or profound disabilities. Or as if somehow some disabilities are, being bunged on. And I use this in the vernacular not because I believe it, but because I know how some people think, and conservatives think, and they say, oh, everyone's got autism, they're all just claiming autism. They're getting this money they don't deserve. It's not sustainable. I think it's not sustainable to give JobKeeper to billionaires, then they keep it as profits. I think that's not sustainable. But what I do think is sustainable is the notion of individualised support packages for people. But what I've also found is that the NDIS model, as it's rolled out, is too much micromanagement. I was shocked to discover that the government of small business and small government, as they would say, the current mob are, that they've got a price guide of 950 items. They're delving into what you buy. They'll tell you what to buy. Like I thought that when the wall came down, that sort of, state planning stopped. But it hasn't. In fact, under this government, it's got more intense. So they know the price of everything and the value of nothing. I don't think it's right that you need to go to a lawyer or an advocate to get your package or your plan sorted out. Now, some people think I'm being a bit harsh on the government. You be the judge of that. I'm not really worried. It's just not right. There's a lack of common sense in the system, and I'll finish on this point. If anyone thinks I'm exaggerating, I just was speaking today to the parents of a young man called Liam Danher. He lived in Cairns. He had severe autism, epilepsy. His risk was when he sleeps, he could choke. He could have a fit, and whilst he was fitting, choke, asphyxiate. And the family got an allied health professional, and the allied health professional said, just get one of these Seizure mattresses. The actual mat is about $450 with all the support around it, wiring and whatever. It's about $2,000, $2,200, $2,300. And the allied health professional recommended that Liam get this mattress. And the government said no. So then they got a neurologist, the family, to say need it. And the government again said no. And then they said go to a government-appointed OT. The government lawyers said that. And the OT came back, the occupational therapist came and said, yeah, you should have this mat. So that was at the AAT. But remember when I started to outlive him, I said he lived in Cairns. He's passed away. Because whilst this process is at the AAT, and I'm sorry if this story causes distress, because for some people this is a real challenge. It's confronting for themselves. But I've got the family's permission to talk about it. The government spent more money fighting the Danher family for the Seizure mattress than the Seizure mattress was worth. Now the issue is, and the government, when we pinged them on this on Monday and sent estimates, the minister said, well, we don't accept there was a causal link between the lack of the mattress and his death. But they also said that they wouldn't agree to an independent review of what happened. The person's died here. This isn't just not reviewing where you stubbed your toe. And they couldn't say that there wasn't a link. The family believed that. And I think families of people with disabilities thought the vision of the NDIS is that they would be believed. Now, they weren't asking for a Rolls Royce with the mattress. They're just asking for the mattress. And so for me, when the government's proposing to re-interview everyone under independent assessments, it's very frustrating if you're blind, if you're deaf, if you're quadriplegic, if you've been diagnosed with, quite severe autism, that you have to prove it again. See, the NDIS is good, but there's this constant anxiety as you approach the end of one plan. Will I lose what I've got? Should I spend everything I've got in the plan so I can keep the same money next time? It's building this sort of survivor mentality. So I think that what we need to do is the NDIS has to go back to its proper vision. Less second guessing of the families and the participants. More support to develop people's goals. More deadlines, not on the participants, but on the agency to respond. Perhaps some more experienced people in the agency. Perhaps less reliance on labour hire. Perhaps if you want to crack down on things, maybe you shouldn't have, the NDIS could publish its decisions so that when one person with severe epilepsy and autism gets a mattress, rather than having to prove every case from the start, the written decision is up there. If they want to do functional assessments of people, perhaps just trust the treating health professionals rather than regard them as part of a conspiracy to defraud the Commonwealth. Anyway, that's enough from me. I want to hear your views. If you disagree, that's fine. There's people from all political spectrum here. It's an open forum. I'd love the government to do open forums with me and we could test each other's views. That won't happen. But my invitation is there. But I want to hear your views. I want to make the NDIS as good as it possibly can be. I want to hear your experience so we, in Parliament, your local rep, can do what we've got to do. If people would tell us their first names, you don't have to tell us a surname, and maybe get 3 or 4 or 5 contributions at a time, because as you can see, I'm not shy of talking, so I'd rather get more from yourselves first.
Yeah, look, thank you. I think what you've seen, Bill, is someone that knows the NDIS very well and knows where there are flaws, and you have your own personal stories. We want to hear them, and I want to be able to help you. So if there's things that you want to talk to me about personally, not in the larger forum, please do so at the end of this meeting. Alternatively, we can actually record where you need help and do our best, my team, to help you. But tonight we're here to give Bill the opportunity to hear your voices and to answer your questions. So it's over to you. So you'd like to take a couple of questions at a
3
time?
or 4, yeah. Just,
Yeah.
people talk.
Did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Hi, I'm Jill from Seizure, and Janine, my business partner. We're a provider, and we entered the NDIS when it was in its infancy. And it's been a really rocky road to watch what participants are going through. The particular concern for us is the independent assessments. We feel that participants were lied to. They were invited to do their independent assessments. They were offered $150 and told that it wasn't going to impact their plan. But we know for a fact that it has.
Really?
It has triggered plan reviews. And it's breaching the trust of participants, providers, everything. The agency treats everyone, participants and providers alike, with hostility, I think, and judgment. And instead of just actually listening to what they're being told, trusting the treaty professionals, it's horrendous. It's horrendous as a participant, it's horrendous as a provider trying to support participants, and it's just not what the scheme was supposed to be. So.
Great.
Do you want to answer that one, or would you
I'll
like?
get another couple of contributions if there are. I promise you I'll come to what you said there.
Is that working?
There's a lady here.
Lady? Is that lady?
Oh, good on you.
Yep, there we go, Debbie.
Oh, thank you. Do you want you go ahead? We got the microphone. Yeah.
There's people there.
Hi.
We'll be in a second.
Try this one. Hi, my name's Leah. I've been with the scheme since the rollout. Started as an advocate but retired after a few, so it got too much. No, I'm joking. It's so bureaucratic. Like just reading the documents, trying to work out, people trying to work out what they need to do, how they need to do things. It's just so bureaucratic. We did the AAT appeals. Nothing was ever published. The actual planners didn't know what had happened at the AAT, so they couldn't see any precedent. We talked to them about this, they didn't want precedent.
Yeah, of course.
You know, it's just bureaucratic, it's mind-blowingly slow, it's a disaster. And look, when we started, they never put on the right amount of staff. They ended up putting a cap on the staffing. We got people that were planners that were from TAC, they were from the other insurance agencies that treated their clients in a way and that became the culture, I believe. Yeah. And that culture hasn't changed. There's some really great planners in there. Look, there are, but you're lucky if you get them. And if you happen to have an LAC who is hired from another provider, that's an absolute nightmare. And they're not doing what they were meant to do, which was support the community and to support people with disabilities. So, and look, going to court, going to the AAT, they hire barristers. Like, they pay a lot of money for a barrister. And we have someone here doing the AAT who can tell you how much they actually spend on barristers. So your question, you're sort of
No, I think I've got the question. Well, I care to comment on your experience. Yeah.
And we'll take one more question.
Yeah, the lady in that corner. So, great.
My name's Victoria. I have two sons with autism.
Sorry, take your time. By the way, I should just say, for every person who's got a story, nearly everyone else in the room will be on your side and have their own story. So, what you just did then gave me goosebumps, so you've already had the impact. Take your time.
We'll come back.
Yeah.
Hi Bill, I really congratulate you on your advocacy for the NDIS. Myself and my business partner Luke, we're an SDA provider, so we're wanting to build lots of homes for
Housing
people
providers,
with disability.
a lot of acronyms in India.
And the one thing that we've found is that when we've interviewed potential applicants for our homes, they're in real crisis. They're in crisis accommodation. They're in aged care facilities. A gentleman didn't even have a proper mattress that he needed for his disability and was in a hotel.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at Luke and I'm saying we can't build these things quick enough. The other issue I suppose we're coming across, Bill, is when these people who are eligible for funding, they need to be assessed. And the process internally within the NDIS needs to be more efficient because once they submit their application, we want them to be able to come into our facility. And we can't have any delay because that delay means they're in a situation where it's not optimal. So that's I suppose one of the key factors that's going to slow us down, because we can build them and we can get the SILs involved, the providers, but if the NDIS is not prepared to come on board with an assessment and the funding, then that's going to slow down the process. I am
SIL.
Support independent living. I'll unpack some of the jargon.
But one of the things that I live in Geelong, we built an NDIS building. 2 of the levels haven't even got NDIS staff in them. The bureaucrats are all in Canberra. Why we didn't build a bloody big NDIS building, put them all in the one building, and force the guys that are running the show to come and live in Geelong? They're all just living in Canberra and want to run the NDIS in Canberra or Sydney, right? Particularly the heads of the organisation, Phil. So I reckon we need to build a second building or extend the one that's there, or at least fill it with NDIS staff,
Or just
make
make
things moving.
the rest of you, when you're told to go to work, have to turn up. Except if you're a highly paid technocrat at the NDIS, then you can do it anywhere.
Yeah, that's right.
That's before you take your package and then you go out and start selling your services to the NDIS. Okay, there were a number of points made there, and I'll start with, it's Janelle, yeah? Jill, sorry, from Sea Change. Is that really a name here? Anyway, Jill's right. The processes are out of control. And see, this is what I would say to you. For a moment, let us imagine we live in this magic world where there's not Liberal or Labor, left or right. There's unicorns fossicking in the paddocks, whatever. But let's live in this magical world where we need to look at the fixes to the NDIS. These are not ideological fixes, a lot of it. It's just common sense. When you make an application, they should spend more time with you in the pre-planning phase than the planning interview. The pre-planning phase, which they rolled out, they tried trials in 2015-16 in the northwestern suburbs of Melbourne, all of a sudden everything moved more quickly. Because there's nothing worse than asking for a plan, having the meeting, and then getting back a plan which you must think is actually meant for someone else. You think this must be a mistake. But it's not. Someone you've never met has got an algorithm set up by an actuary, and whatever you did, whatever dog and pony show you put on and reports, you sort of just get the Xerox, standard form of a few bells and whistles. Then when you want to appeal for make a variation, I couldn't believe that this is bureaucracy gone crazy. If you want to vary an item by a couple of $100, you've got a whole process. I'm not exaggerating, am I, Rachel? He's here from Rope. What? There must be a whole army, a little Oompa Loompa somewhere just dreaming this stuff up, chimpanzees typing, because it is nuts. It is not a sensible way to run an organisation. The other thing is when you assistive technology, that's the first one you could overhaul. You can order on Amazon something from anywhere in the world in 5 days. But God help us if NDIA ever runs Amazon, it'll be bankrupt the day after tomorrow. I'm not, it's true. I'll come to it, but I just want to go to some of these points because it's important. So I do not, and they have more consultants there than Collins Street, being charged more money than they have at the Reserve Bank. And for what? I am confident that if you had more people with a disability on the board of the agency, perhaps even some more people with lived experience of disability at the highest ranks of the NDIA, not because it's woke or politically correct, because it's actually the smart thing to do. And so, appeals, we would, if we were elected, get some proper experts and just have the AAT, a special court, just sit night and day and just deal with every appeal. Just knock them all over. Then what you do is you publish the decisions. There is a very clear reason why they don't publish their decisions. It's because if they publish their decisions, other people will know what to ask for.
That's right.
So it's just BS on a massive scale. It's a cover-up. It's a strategy design that every person, it's like a game of snakes and ladders, but you'd think that after each experience you're a bit closer to the top. You're not. Everything starts at the start again. So they want to have independent assessments to assess your disability because they want to be fair and equitable. What would be fair and equitable? They don't need to spend $339 million on multinational companies to meet you. What they could actually do is just publish the decisions where they've already allocated taxpayer money and build a body of knowledge around it. That's what the tax office does, our tax office rule is. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So I do think there is a lot of bureaucratic stupidity at the highest ranks. I do think that at the moment the prevailing ideology is to cut, make it harder for people to get into the system. So, you know, to Leah's point and to your point, Jill, there is a lot of low-hanging fruit, a bit of common sense. But, you know, we talk about the staff of the NDIS, a lot of them are good people. But people are only as good as the people who lead them. Like, in the coalition, and this is a little bit of politics, I will digress back to the real world. You had the ministers, they've had 7 ministers for disability in 8 years. Stuart Robert just wanted to get out of disability. He wanted to get promoted to Home Affairs. God help us. So they pushed him sideways. And then you get a minister who was disgraced in an upper portfolio given disability as a demotion. I actually want to be the minister for the NDIS. That's a good thing to be. In and itself, that's a good destination. So what we have to do is common sense, and I'm not oversimplifying, it really is. Like this travel allowance drives me bonkers. You get 3 different grades of travel, I think, you know, 1100 or 2200 or 3300, whatever the number is. Do you know what? Why don't we just let you use your budget on travel if you want to use it on travel? It's like car modifications. You can buy an expensive Mercedes van, if you're lucky enough, but if you don't have that amount of loose change down the back of the couch, why don't we just let you modify your existing vehicle? Well, there's just common sense in space. Number one is carers. Like, there's nothing wrong, and you shouldn't feel guilty about having some respite. Family members, I mean, it's difficult, I'm not saying you pay them, but I'm saying that if you need a week, and the person looking after needs a week away from you, that's okay. So why can't we, instead of making carers being viewed to be as having a conflict of interest with the participant? That's bloody rude to every mother and father. There is no conflict of interest, but it's okay that if you want your adult child to have a week away from you, that's okay. Why feel guilty? Because, you know, I was in Darebin in the northern suburbs at a special school. They told me a heartbreaking story. A girl had pretty severe autism. She's about 15, 16, big girl, and you know, fully developed. And the parents couldn't get the care package to get a couple of hours for a couple of times a week for the child. And in the end, guess what? The parents divorced. They just couldn't cope, and they left this child at school. Not because they're bad parents, because they were broken. I make no judgment. I make judgment of the system not giving them a couple of sets of 4 hours of care a week. So the school, well, the teachers, you know, what do? They eventually found some State Department people who put this girl in a hotel in Hawthorne on Glenferrie Road. Schools, you know, in Thomastown or whatever, to the northern suburbs. In the year and a half she was at that hotel, there was nearly $1 million of damage. So when they say the scheme isn't sustainable, denying this hard-working, committed, loving family a few hours of care each week has cost the taxpayer squillions more. And there's wreckage, there's emotional wreckage. So there's the lack of common sense and the willingness. And the problem I feel with the NDIA when I've met with them, I said, well, isn't it your job as the big dog of disability to allocate $22 billion a year in packages to have a view about where the workforce of the future is going to come from? You know, better standards of training, better accreditation, career paths, bit of dignity, thinking about how you want people to come into the disability world rather than just relying on never getting a home, having enough money for a mortgage, burning people out, having people live from grant to grant. How about you develop a workforce? But I said, well, that's not really our job. And I thought, well, my God, what is your job?
Well, how do you go when we get phone calls, and we had one with the woman saying, I'm about to drive into a
Yeah.
hole.
Yeah.
Because the NDIS will not give me any funding. So Janine and I spent about half an hour to 3/4 of an hour saying, are you okay? What can we do? Is this where you can go?
Yeah.
Your heart just breaks when you you're faced with that. You're sitting at your desk, you're getting on with what you're doing, and then this person reaches out, and
Of course, it's so, and there's just a toll, and you get that it's not easy. And I've never met anyone in the world of disability or in the disability community who's expecting a bunch of flowers and a box of Tim Tams every day. But what I hate, and it's motivated me since I was a union rep to being a labour member, I hate it when we waste people. When you waste their energy, when you burn them up in stupidity. Stupid orders, stupid structures really offend me. Stupidity in institutions you should know better. The whole point of the NDIS is to give you control, not to sort of grind you down. It's a bit like the housing issues that our friends mentioned. One of the things which I know the government secretly thinks, how we know the government secretly thinks, because I hear, they think that the housing is too generous. They think too much money in the NDIS is going to specialist disability accommodation, SDA, and then the support packages, the SIL packages, supported independent living. They think this is too expensive, just like they think there's probably too many cases of autism claiming packages. Now, these are harsh things, it's not what I think, that's my gut. My gut tells me this is what they think. That we never really wanted this much to be going. There are about 28,000 people eligible for specialist disability accommodation, and a lot of people in the fund say, well, they get a big portion of the NDIS. Well, yeah, they do.
Yeah, because they're very
So,
disabled.
because they're very disabled and they need that. But the goal of independent living is a worthwhile goal. It is not unrealistic. And it is not too generous. But now what I see is with this specialist disability accommodation, they want everyone just to live in group homes of 3 people plus a carer's bed. But I know people who want to live on their own and perhaps have their carer, their paid carer, and maybe they can have a family member come and stay with them. Heaven forbid. I don't think that's cheating. I don't think taxpayers would mind that. In fact, I know they wouldn't. But this SDA, when you build the housing and people choose it, what's happening is you've got to then get the SIL, the Support Independent Living Package, but the NDIA get in between that. So when you've got your housing and you've got your carers, your carer team read, then the NDIS want to have to assess it. Now, okay, a little bit of assess it, make sure it's what it says it is, there's not people being exploited. But the approvals are taking 4, 6, 8 months, and in some cases when people have come up with innovative housing accommodation options, the NDIS say basically that doesn't fit our cookie cutter. So there is a problem. They're turning into a dog's breakfast. And they're coming up with options for accommodation care which are ignoring what the person wants and are too innovative for some of the senior people in the NDIA to wrap their heads around. But they're missing the point. I fundamentally believe that if you give someone with a severe or profound disabilities and their immediate care infrastructure an individual package where they decide how it's used within certain broad guide ropes, not price items of $950, you will make the money go further. So we just keep banging on the door. We will win this argument. I'm engaged, you're engaged, and I'll talk briefly before then how we win the argument, but this is the argument. It's about control.
I have 2 sons who are on the NDIS, and one of them has a girlfriend who's also on the NDIS. And for 2 years, there's a shared house, and her room's been ready for 2 years, and they keep saying the funding's not available. And in the last couple of weeks, they've said she can't move in. And she has an intellectual disability, she doesn't understand why. And the room's ready, the room's painted. And now, her mother's elderly and there's someone else in the family. And so she can't move in. But what I was going to mention before is I've written quite a lot of emails to the politicians, including Libby, which is how I got the invitation here. And I sent the same one to, during the lockdown, my son Owen, who is, had non-functional speech, writes little stories, and he wrote a book and he sent it to Scott Morrison, and Scott Morrison's office explaining that. So the email that I sent to all the politicians from the Prime Minister's office was being viewed as a complaint about the NDIS and has been sent to the NDIS as a complaint. So I wasn't complaining about the NDIS, I was complaining about the government. And they're different.
I don't know if that's a statement or a question. Do we have any other questions?
On the young woman with the accommodation outstanding request, let's get Libby's office onto, if you haven't already.
They don't live in this, they live in Rosebud. So they live in
No, that's correct,
Yes.
In the lottery of political life, we just lost. No, maybe you could have won. We will take it up anyway, okay? Yeah, we'll take it up anyway.
Yeah.
I'm Colleen. I've got a daughter who's been on the NDIS for about 18 months. She has a rare chronic illness. It was really hard to get on the scheme, but it's been amazing since we've been on it.
Yep.
I also work with vulnerable young people in Geelong, and I guess my experience there is I've got some concerns about equality, about accessing the scheme. I think I'm fortunate enough to be, tertiary educated, got some resources behind me, and I was able to fight for my daughter to get the proper assessment she needed to get, all that sort of stuff done. But young people I know in Geelong that don't have families that have got those capabilities, I really have concerns. There's a big waiting list to see paediatricians, to get basic sort of any kinds of reports done. So whilst for my personal circumstances I really hate the idea of independent assessments, and I don't think they're the answer, but I wonder what Labor thinks is the answer for that vulnerable cohort that haven't got families able to...
Colleen, was it?
Yeah.
Well, you're right, Colleen, and I don't know if I said it in this or the last meeting I was in. There is an issue about equity of access. And I'll pick a more extreme example, although you've said it very well about Geelong. In the Northern Territory, where you've got a lot of First Australians who live in more remote communities who suffer from fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, they're just not accessing it. They get to spend perhaps 10%, and when they do access, because of the lack of services, they might spend 10 or 15% of their budget. So there is an equity problem. If you're articulate, if you're too stubborn to ever give up, and maybe this room would have a disproportionate number of stubborn people, then you can, and they give themselves away by laughing at that, but the point about it is, whilst that's not easy, for the people who don't have someone like you in their lives, then it's even harder. So I do like the idea of being able to access a sort of government report system. I do think that makes sense. I don't think that's what's motivating these independent assessments, though. I'm sorry, but this is for, all these guys want to do is reduce the expenditure, and so that's what I think this is a mechanism towards. If they want to do independent assessments, they could work on an appropriate test, and not every disability can be assessed the same way. Well, that sort of goes without saying. Why not let treating allied health professionals do them? So at least you're trusting the system rather than, you're trusting the people who already got the knowledge rather than just chucking them in a room with a random, assessor. But I do think in terms of equity, there are ways to reach out to less empowered groups. Like I was speaking to a committee member of the Federation of Ethnic Community Groups nationally last night at a function, and people whose first language isn't English, who are Australian citizens, are finding it a lot harder. But I think you reach out to the target groups and you start promoting what the scheme is, and you provide assessors and people who can help you for those groups. But you don't make everyone reapply.
Yeah.
Like if they were just interested in the groups who are not getting it, you wouldn't start with all the people who are getting it, would you?
No.
But that's what we would do, because I think it's a real issue. And there's money to be saved in the system. Like last year, the government spent, or the NDIS spent $17 million in legal fees. That's to stop people. Like I can't believe, that is a litigation strategy. I started a class action against the government in 2019 on a scheme they had called RoboDebt, and we got court legal to run it, and it's come up trumps. So I just formed the view that it was just illegal. The whole thing was just illegal. And it turns out it was illegal. but you shouldn't need to go to lawyers, and we found out they had a litigation strategy, which is why they settled before it got to court, on the day of court. If you complained, they'd pay you off and give you, say, sorry, we shouldn't have this money. But surely if you settle hundreds of times, you might work out that your legislation or what you're doing is faulty, and they should have changed the legislation to make it legal or own up. But they did the worst of all worlds. They would fight you if you had the wherewithal, they would pay you off, but then they kept running their dodgy scheme. And that's what I think their approach at NDIS is. They want everyone to reapply, and they'll start chopping.
Yeah, I'm Warren from Liberty Disability Services. So I manage a big team of support coordinators.
Great.
And so we sit through a lot of these planning meetings.
Yeah, well, you know better than you can give my talk.
And I can give you plenty of scenarios, but two of the big bugbears that I see all the time is the inconsistency between every planner, that there's never the same answer, and you'll hear from one planner, oh, you can get this, but you're not allowed to have that. Then you go to the next planner and they'll say the opposite. They will clearly disregard therapists' reports, so that what we do is we make sure the therapists outline every recommendation on their reports. So it's very clear, and every therapist has that on their report. It'll go to the planner, and then you get back the plan, and it might be a third of what was recommended. And so then we then go through that review process, then the review of the review process, then the AAT process, and then by that time, the new plan's due anyway. So, yeah, and then the other one is when we're supporting participants who are 7 years or under in the early intervention, and the parental responsibility scapegoat clause that they have, where you ask for something, primarily respital care, as you mentioned earlier, and the planner always comes back and says, oh, well, that's a parental responsibility. And it's like, well, no, it's only a parental responsibility if it is what every other child would normally have. But if it's because of the disability, then that's outside of that requirement. So I suppose what I'm getting at is that when it comes to the independent assessments, is there going to be consistency between every assessor, and are they just going to go rogue like they are now?
I think that if you were, the problem with these people running the NDIA at the top and the government is they get a sense they're building the plane while it's up in the air. And really, they should lift the staffing cap, they should invest in more long-term staff within the NDIA, they should make planning a profession. They should actually train people, and they should also, there should be a bit of a book of decisions, a digest. I still read books, my kids look like I'm a weirdo, but you should have a set of just decisions. Start off, lived experience, what you do, how you do it. Get better planners, and I don't want to be too harsh on the planners. There's some really good ones, and other people are just flung into an area. Well, it takes a while to understand these things. I think they should set up more functional-based disability expertise. In other words, not every planner can know every disability equally well, and I think that where you've got sufficiently common conditions, maybe with autism or I don't know, particularly why not get a bit of knowledge in depth? So rather than asking someone who's a geographic planner to deal with every condition, we can drop some depth and some speciality. Ask someone who's a specialist. Complex cases. Plenty of people have more than one condition. And so I think it's better to develop expertise in the planners. The other thing is, I think support coordination is a really valuable role. I think it was interesting during COVID, we could do something then which we can't do now. And it makes you wonder why it takes a crisis for us to do it. And then when it works, why do we stop doing it when the crisis stops? But so I think that support coordination should be a navigator through the system. And I think that is a pretty useful sort of function. A lot of people are just worn down. I get stressed out trying to sort out my electricity bill. And, and the reality is that many of you are dealing with much more complex government interactions. And I just think sometimes it'd be good to let the support coordinator do that, have more effort on the pre-planning with disability advocates and the experts, so the planning process becomes a lot more seamless. I think time restrictions on the agency, when they've got a decision in front of them, they have to make a decision within a certain time period, or it is deemed accepted. And if they're going to say no, they have to put their reasons in writing. At least gives you a chance to have a level playing field, doesn't it? So there's plenty of, but you could write the operations manual, I've got no doubt, of what they should do. None of this is too intellectually complex. As for the early years, you know, I think this is really vexed. This argument that somehow miraculously when a child is at school age, the schooling system's going to pick up and replace all the therapies and treatments they've been receiving, which is so valuable in those early years, is a fiction. So I do get that school helps take up some of the time and some of the opportunity, but you know, I've had a lot of really upset, even younger parents, who never sort of really, they're not like the older generation, just never even sort of saw this as part of what their life would be, but they have to. They get the early childhood therapies, which you get the complex news that your child is going to develop in one way, not another. That's a shock. But you get on with it because you love your child. And then you find therapies which work and you go, oh, okay, I can breathe a bit, this is working. Then you get told that you get another shock. School age, chop, chop, chop to the therapies. And I'm thinking, yes, I know the schools are there, but they're not going to provide everything that your child needs to develop and to get the best out of the schooling. So I think that is a pretty hot button issue. It's a bit like when someone finishes school, where do they go? And that's why I think you've got to have more emphasis in packages in the future on participation and employment. I don't necessarily mean open employment, but just participation. A sense that the plan that this is a person with an interest in life, and you know, it's a bit like the travel. There's nothing wrong with having some travel budget which lets you just go out and have a life, as opposed to let's just go to the doctor.
We've got time for one more round of questions.
Yeah.
There's a couple down the front. There's a couple of ladies at the front. What I might do is get them to ask their questions. We'll go down and take a couple more,
Yeah.
and then maybe
One round up.
speak to all of those. First we've got Janine.
Hello, Bill, it's Janine. I've got a good news story. My daughter has started to speak. She's 23 years old. We have fought like she's gone from having 4 words 2 years ago to 804 word sentences now.
Wow.
Now the NDIS is saying, well, she only needs 2 speech therapy sessions a week, where with her condition, she's dyspraxic, she's severely autistic. Basically, she was given up on at age 7 by everyone, and she'll never speak. I never believed it for a second. So I have fought for the speech therapy and got it, but you know, now she's starting to improve on it, and now they're saying, oh, we can cut it back. So
That's terrible.
the fight goes on. I'll never give up. Another thing is she's just moved into an SDA after 3 years of us asking for it. I'm to the end of tether. I've got a brain tumour and basically she needed help. So we finally got it, but of course NDIS approved the SIL funding. Oh, they forgot all about the SDA funding. So now it's back to them again, but she's already moved into the house, so bad luck. So,
Good on you.
but my big fear at the moment is what happens when we get, you know, another government in that is just so bad and rips this apart. What happens to our kids then? And that's, as a mother, that just tears me up. So, you know, we really need to have bipartisan support, and that's what it's supposed to be, but I can't see it happening.
There's a couple of questions
There's a few down.
down the front.
Plenty.
Hi, I'm a participant and I'm actually fairly happy with what's going on, but I have a neurological condition called HSP, hereditary spastic paraplegia. One of the things that amazes me is I belong to a support group and I see a number of people who are rejected by the NDIA, even though it's a listed condition. And if one thing that needs to go back to the NDIA is read your own documentation. I mean, how can I get it and another person with the same condition not get it? It just amazes me. And it's hereditary. So people tell me that because it's not permanent, that's why they didn't get it. It's hereditary, for heaven's sakes. So, as a question, as a statement, tell the NDIA and their staff to actually learn what they're supposed to learn, because it's just ridiculous. You want to talk about a waste of money? It's a waste of money when they reject people, when they shouldn't be, when the documentation is saying they are applicable, they qualify. So that's number one. Number two is I'd like to understand why the Act says people over 65 can't apply anymore.
Sure.
I have a personal friend who has, again, a qualifying condition, but it really only happened when he was 64. Now, when that condition occurred, the doctors said, you may improve. Well, a year later, he hasn't improved, and now he's 65. I don't understand why something like that was put in place in the first place. Just doesn't make logical sense.
All right, I'll answer both of those.
I'm Bianca. I'm a participant, and my son is also a participant. So Tom's 13 with cerebral palsy, acquired brain injury, stroke, cerebral palsy. So he's one of the biggest packages, 130,000 plus, which puts him in that top 6% of big spenders that the government are upset about. We're in the complex care team because of my disability and his together. I went to a coffee morning with some mums of kids with cerebral palsy last week, and I was really upset to see that there's still gaps in early intervention. For our kids, as soon as they're born, it's obvious that they've got a brain injury. 12% of those kids will be profoundly intellectually and profoundly physically disabled, like Tom. So those kids from day dot, and they're usually preemie babies or maybe overdue, too long. There's a NICU centre, a neonatal intensive care unit now in Geelong, thank goodness, because you used to have to go to the children's and the women's. They flag these kids immediately. The early intervention, their therapies have to start from day one of their life for them to have the best outcome.
Yeah.
And they won't need modified bikes, they won't need to go to special school, they won't need wheelchairs if they have therapy from day one. And everyone knows who these kids are. So all the families need all this support. That is going to complex care like us. And I'm just worried there's still gaps, so there shouldn't be gaps anymore. And we've got the NICU centre here now, we've got the Kids Plus Foundation now at Epworth. Everything's set up, and I would like a trial site again for that cohort of kids, because they're eventually going to be the top 6% like Tom spending the funds. So I'd like to hear more about early intervention and also we're SDA, so more about that.
I'm sorry to move everyone along. It's just that I know Bill's he's got things happening after this. So, but we have a question here. Would you like to ask your question?
Hi Bill, my name's Brad. Thanks for hearing our voices tonight. I agree with everyone tonight. It's complex, it's complicated. There's issues with planning and productivity and efficiency that the NDIS can certainly improve on. But I'd like to say it's changed our life, me and my wife and my kids. It's really improved our life. Yeah, and I just want to thank you and Julia Gillard for implementing it, because I know there's lots of bad stories, but ours is a good one. Well, I self-manage my plan. It's quite complex. It's a big budget one. My wife helps me pay contractors to my support workers. She watches those people's wages going in and out, and you know, quite a lot of them are quite substantial. My wife's provided more care than anyone has over 24 years. Yeah, and she's been unreal, saved my life many times. And I just like to know where the Labor Party stands on, you know, compensating the informal carers that go far and beyond what's expected of what a wife should have to do.
Thanks, Brad.
All right, Brandon, I know there are other questions that it's always better to leave the party while you're having fun, they tell me. Just so the other questions we'll talk to with you and follow up. So I didn't catch the name of the lady who was talking about her daughter who's got 840 words. What was your first name? Janine. Listen, some days in politics it's just crap. You know, newspapers kick you or whatever, your opponents kick you. You know, it's just tough. It comes with it. But when I get a moment to hear a story like yours, I just love it. I don't think there was anyone who didn't have some reaction to your determination when your daughter was told that she can't speak and give up on her, and then 840 words. So you probably don't hear this enough, but I'm sure, unlike everyone else here, you know, you represent a whole champion, and you know, you should just realise that I think a lot of people respect what you do, and you're a very good mum. So Mother's Day, there's another 80 people who reckon you're a very, very good mum. That's my thing, you know. You shouldn't have to relitigate. If something's working, you don't stop doing it. Then again, you do not need a degree in business. You do not need to have the invisible advice of a God to tell you that if it's working, keep doing it. So, you know, again, we'll help out.